We're back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at The Federalist. As always, you can email the show at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on Twitter at FDRLST. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, and subscribe wherever you download your podcasts. Today, I'm happy to be joined once again by my colleague, senior editor at The Federalist, Christopher Bedford. Chris, thanks so much for joining.
Happy to. Happy afternoon.
Well, we're talking about something very serious that doesn't sound serious at all, because it sounds kind of like a joke, maybe a sick joke. But Dr. Seuss is being canceled. And I know you just filed a story on it. So why don't you walk us through the argument that you made in your story?
Sure. My article came out this afternoon because I wasn't going to write anything yesterday. I was really depressed about the whole thing. I spent the morning... spent the morning trying to go through online used bookstores and try to find the two books that I loved from Dr. Seuss that were banned. One was If I Ran the Zoo, and If I Saw It on Mulberry Street, which is his first children's book. It's based on his being raised in Springfield, Massachusetts. I'm from Massachusetts, and yeah, I don't have any kids, so I don't buy presents for my kids because I don't have them, but I buy them for my other friends and their children. And this was the first time I'd ever actually gone shopping for my own someday to hopefully have. And I was trying to find these so I could share what I read as a child and what was read in my classroom with them. But they'd already cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars a book because they'd been canceled that morning, and sometimes thousands of dollars a book. I even went to a local children's bookstore because of it, and was unable to find it there. And I went to the old left-wing bookstore on the block, but it had been shut down, probably at least limited hours due to COVID. One more casualty in my neighborhood. So last night when I was going to sleep late at night around 1 a.m., I texted a memory I had that we were studying Dr. Seuss in Massachusetts in kindergarten. And I remember coming in, I remember this distinctly, the teacher told us that Dr. Seuss had passed away in his 90s. That kind of blew me away, and I don't think anybody was particularly crying at that moment, because I never even assumed that Dr. Seuss was someone who I had shared a lifetime with, who I had been alive on the same earth with for 5 years, someone who was like flesh and blood, like my grandfather or my parents, just the day before. Dr. Seuss's pictures were on our wall. His books had taught us to read. I mean, my mother had grown up watching the television show How the Grinch Stole Christmas, the television movie. We'd grown up listening to the music. We got to watch that at my grandfather's house, visiting her. We lived in the town that she was raised in. All of these things were part of our life. And I got Dr. Seuss gifts even going forward. The Places You'll Go when I was graduating. And talking to some friends about this, how I remembered being in the classroom. I remember my teachers and the assistants sitting in front of us. I remember the blocks that were behind her because I used to get in trouble for deconstructing them and turning them into transformer robots.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. The Decepticons and all that. And the windows were on the right with Joey's Park that my dad helped build out there in the park. And the door into the back left. I remember just sitting there cross-legged with everyone. And this was a moment that seared into my memory from many years ago. And I realized, talking to my friends, that this is the same experience that a lot of people had. Not my experience. Maybe they weren't alive when he was. Maybe they knew he was alive. Maybe they knew Dr. Seuss. Maybe they were an educator. Maybe they were just a student. But it was hard to grow up in the United States and in other parts of the world as well, English-speaking world, without having Dr. Seuss as personally a part of your life, your Christmas time, sometimes birthdays, learning to read, graduations. This was something that was harmless, and I don't think there's a single child in history who has ever looked at Dr. Seuss and felt any kind of hurt or anything but happiness, the kind of happiness that these experts who canceled him can never hope to have and can never hope to give children or anyone.
Well, let me ask you the devil's advocate question of the hour. Why shouldn't Dr. Seuss be canceled?
Why should he be? He has not ever hurt anyone. I mean, Dr. Seuss lives a dream that so many of us are probably actually too selfish to even consider dreaming, which is that long after we're gone, that we can make people happy, people we've never met in places we've never been, make those people feel happy and be a part of their lives. And add these whimsical ideas that the world is poorer because Dr. Seuss's ideas of what lived in a zoo and what kind of crazy animals a child might see are no longer here. These were purely innocent imaginations of an artist, and I mean, he's a gentle soul. This is someone who was not a violent person. He was maybe the closest he ever came to violence were some of his political opinions. He was violently anti-fascist. He was violently for Roosevelt in the World Wars. And he was, of course, a left-winger. He sympathized a great deal, as many people did, unfortunately, in the 30s and 40s, with some of our allies in the Soviet Union who were later exposed as horrible people. He wasn't a perfect man, but the books he wrote for children, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, whose heart grew 3 sizes that day afterwards, the Little Cindy Lou from Whoville, The Cat in the Hat. These are innocent things. In order for any expert or educator to overanalyze this and to look at these memories and these children's books and to draw anything but wanting to bring happiness, it shows you not what's in Dr. Seuss's heart, it shows you what's in those experts' hearts.
Yeah, I want to read a sentence from our colleague John Daniel Davidson's article on this, which was published this morning. It sort of gets to that point you make. All of Geisel's work is, in the judgment of left-wing academia, an exercise in, quote, white supremacy, paternalism, conformity, and assimilation. It might be easy for conservatives to laugh that off as nonsense, but they shouldn't, because this isn't really even about Geisel. And then John goes on to argue, and what again may seem dramatic to some people, that the left is, quote, carrying out a cultural revolution. He compares it to what we saw with Mao. Chris, do you think that goes too far? Or do you think indeed what is happening here is an early we're living through the early days of something that could be really dramatic if not stopped immediately?
I think we're past the early days of this. Just like Mao during his Cultural Revolution dug up the graves of Confucius and his family, dug up their village and pillaged them in front of people. I mean, this is a sacred and venerated figure to the Chinese, and someone who was held up even by the Chinese communists as a way to show discipline. This Cultural Revolution aspect, the reason why they did that to Confucius was to let the Chinese people know that they can do it to him, they can do it to anyone. Now here in the United States, what we've seen happen in the last couple of years, we've seen that happen to Abraham Lincoln and to George Washington, to Thomas Jefferson, to those people and even the people who weren't famous, the unknown rebel soldier who just faces the South in Arlington, someone who probably never owned a person, probably never knew a person who owned a person, and never maybe even owned anything himself. They had to tear that down. When they say that they can come for George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Jesus Christ and the saints who gave everything that they could to help the indigenous of California, to save their souls and also to bring warmth and comfort to those people, when they can go for them, they can go for anyone. So why not Dr. Seuss? But unlike some of these people in history, because a lot of Americans, unfortunately, don't know a whole lot about George Washington. They don't know that Thomas Jefferson was a complicated man who worked hard to free slaves, even if he couldn't get over his own failings, his own moral failings in this, who brought us religious liberty, helped bring us this experiment. They might not understand that, but you don't have to understand Thomas Jefferson to understand Dr. Seuss. Like, you could be barely literate. You can just look at pictures and love Dr. Seuss. To think of him as a conformist, I mean, he literally drew animals that don't exist. What kind of conformity is this? It's insidious, and they can come for anyone, but this is a point where they've come into our childhoods, and not just our childhoods, but our ability to share with our children and our grandchildren or our godchildren or our neighbors' children what made some of the lights of our lives, some of the innocent imaginations and happy, joyful memories of our lives.
I'm going to continue playing devil's advocate, and the reason is that I think we take a lot of these arguments for granted. We take for granted the idea that it's obvious we shouldn't be banning books or engaging in digital book burnings or ceasing to publish particular books, beloved books that are part of American history at this point, because our modern standards have deemed them racist, and those standards continue to change for the worse every single day. But I think part of the reason we've had this problem is that conservatives were kind of calling attention to all of this crazy stuff happening on college campuses or whatever for years. And it was almost taken for granted that that was crazy and that that was something that shouldn't happen. And in that vacuum, the left stepped into that vacuum and decided that their new regime would enforce their rules. And their rules are of a wild standard and an unhealthy standard. But I do think to some extent we take for granted that everybody agrees with such an obvious argument, right? Like, it's so obvious that free expression and that some of these beloved American treasures are essential. But it's not to so many people anymore. We have lost the shared consensus. We've lost the thread. We've lost the shared sense of values about what is good and what is bad. And so with that, Chris, I want to ask you, if, let's say, Dr. Seuss was a man of another era and he portrayed he portrayed things in ways that had Japanese stereotypes or whatever may have been common at the time, and it is still obviously wrong. If that is the case,
he gave zoo animals monkey skirts. Like, he gave zoo animals tribal skirts. I mean, these in order to find offense in this, to like personify people in a zoo depictions is completely insane. It's just like the academic who said that Curious George is an example of white patriarchy imperialism because he's a lost monkey. It's like, well, who's comparing monkeys or fantasy animals to people? You absolute psychopaths.
Isn't Curious George in like a little? Doesn't someone wear like a Teddy Roosevelt outfit in Curious George? Is it his like handler? I don't remember.
His handler is the man in the yellow hat who wears he wears a safari suit. I mean, he didn't find Curious George in Acton, Massachusetts, where I grew up. He had to travel the world to find that. They weren't local to New England.
So let's tell me why it's such a big deal that that Dr. Seuss's foundation or publishing house, whatever it is, has stopped printing a few books. Tell me why that's a big deal. Tell me why that's worth us getting up in arms about.
Because these are harmless. These aren't bad books. This isn't. I mean, we used to live in a country where we prided ourselves in the fact that we didn't even ban Mein Kampf, that we didn't ban monarchist literature, that we allowed idiot neo-Nazis to march alongside civil rights protesters because this is America. But if you look at the pictures and you look at the reactions and you look at the people you remember from the 1960s, do you remember George Wallace? Do you remember Martin Luther King? I mean, which one of those people gives you a sense of pride in your country? The man who helps lift up his neighbors in the name of God, in the name of freedom, or the man who was cosplaying as a stormtrooper, like some kind of kink? We're not afraid of these things. But beyond bad ideas, Dr. Seuss is not a bad idea. It's a harmless thing that's brought nothing but joy to children. I mean, he wrote about characters like the left right now. He wrote about the Grinch literally sneaking down out of his joyless, lonely mountain existence because he'd never actually felt love, and stealing Christmas trees from people and stealing stockings from Cindy Lou Who, who was no more than 2, until he saw the error of his ways. And that, we should have pity for these people who look at Dr. Seuss and then they put racial stereotypes, they put hate, and they put things like that onto him. Sure, did Dr. Seuss draw some wartime propaganda in World War II that was insensitive to the Japanese people? He did. We're not talking about that. We're talking about his children's books here. They don't know that happy secret. They don't know that joy that children see from watching that. In order to miss that, you have to be such an unhappy person, such a deeply sad and lonely person. And then to put that in all these other people, and it's not just I think Dr. Seuss is an important thing to push back on because we've seen actresses canceled and actors canceled and singers and songwriters, but they're strangers on the television. Many of them will make more money in a year than a lot of Americans will make maybe in 10 or 20 or maybe even more years their entire life. They seem somewhat distant, or we lack some of the historical knowledge as a people sometimes to understand that Thomas Jefferson, having not been a perfect man, didn't make him an absolutely brilliant person who led the world for rights and personal liberties. We might have difficulty understanding that, but we all understand the importance of a happy childhood. This past Christmas, in half the country at least, the left, with their obsession with rules and safety and no one ever being hurt, stole the opportunity from children to even sit on Santa Claus's lap, for people to celebrate with the elderly. Because of their rules, we've had our elderly dying alone in nursing homes for their own health and for their own good. It's worth calling these people not just unhappy. Teach your children that they're unhappy, but we as adults can understand this as evil and a dangerous, destructive impulse. This does not come from a place of light. This impulse comes from a very dark place in these people. To say that Jesus Christ and Queen Mary are somehow symbols of patriarchy and white power. These are very, very bad people. And to your point about where are we as a country, I mean, I'm very worried about the possibility of a future of our country. I actually don't think that simple education in civics and history will fix the fact that right now we have a people that aren't a good and moral people. Largely, we don't have a shared religion. We don't have a shared language. We don't all believe in a shared border. We don't all believe in a shared responsibility. We don't even have a shared idea of what a citizen is. We don't agree on the same heroes, the same norms, the same mores, the same legends and myths of our creation. We don't agree on what's going on right now, and we don't agree on where our country's headed. So, I mean, it seems to me that the American experiment is in for a pretty hard breaking. And this is just another example of it. We should all be able to stand up and say, I will read to my children Dr. Seuss. And hopefully we will be able to actually allow those books I was trying to buy for my future children yesterday, allow those some kind of access so we can show them at least even on a screen and print them out so we can flip through their pages. Because you know that no collector who owns a $1,000 book is going to want children with their somehow always dirty hands going through his pages and bending back those bindings. They've taken those, just like people stealing art from the public space. They've taken what was meant to bring joy, and for the last 80 years had brought joy to people, and they made it a thing of collectors and a thing of hate. And it's just not right.
I think you just did a really excellent and troubling layout of the slippery slope argument, and I agree with your
we're over the cliff.
Right. I was going to say, I agree with you charted the path, but it's the path that we've already taken, as you say. What we've seen is the slippery slope is not, in fact, a fallacy. It's very real, and sort of people who were talking about, you don't have to worry about people getting upset about this or that. You don't have to worry about what's happening on crazy college campuses. I think what we've seen is that's obviously false, and that means that you should actually worry about these silly little pop culture cancellations or cultural cancellations, because it will continue to get worse. And this does feel like we're over the cliff. We're Thelma and Louising into the Grand Canyon at this point. But I would also add,
at least they were free.
Yeah, they were having fun.
They had nothing up to lose, but at least they were free in those last moments. I would trade a convertible over a canyon for what I'm feeling right now, I tell you.
But what I was going to say also is that beyond the slippery slope argument, what's so important to note is that when we accept situations like what is happening right now with Dr. Seuss, that creates and reinforces norms. So when we accept these definitions of bigotry and of unacceptable speech or unacceptable art, whatever it is, we are creating and reinforcing boundaries that do not just affect people like Gina Carano, who I think you alluded to, or actresses and actors and comedians. They do not just affect the famous and the powerful, because that word cancel, a lot of those people aren't canceled, right? Like Barry Weiss self-deported from the New York Times and has a super successful Substack. The same could be said of Andrew Sullivan in New York Magazine. The same will be said of Gina Carano, who took her career and is probably going to continue to make money. People in the public eye generally are able to leverage their cancellation somehow. It's still deeply unjust and unfair what happens to them, but they're usually fine. What happens when we allow and accept these definitions to take hold in our society is that they impact people down the chain from famous public figures who don't have the resources. They chill the speech of people, regular people, everyday people in the rest of the country who don't push back on certain things. And for instance, then we end up with, as Abigail Shrier documents, this epidemic of girls that are inflicting, quote, irreversible damage on their bodies. And that's because nobody wants to speak up. It's because doctors don't want to speak up. It's because parents don't want to speak up when their children are conditioned in kindergarten classes to believe in the normalization of transgenderism, especially at a young age. It's because nobody wants to speak up.
Mixed with genital mutilation is a norm in 2021, I guess.
And it bulldozes, right? Well, yeah, and that just sort of allows the slow bulldozing of the culture. And at some point, you have to be the hippie chained to the tree, and that's sort of what we need to get to. But this really does affect real people. This is not just sort of like, oh, it's a few Dr. Seuss books, it'll be fine. Chris Bedford can't read his kid's Cat in the Hat. That's not really what the problem is. The problem is that we are creating definitions that affect regular people and affect the speech of regular people so that we don't have an open conversation and we don't sort of refine our norms and ideas, and we allow really, really bad ideas like the hormone treatment for children to take root because nobody wants to risk speaking up because their jobs and livelihoods would be in danger.
Because those horrible little Eichmanns that we've raised are now in the Human Resources Department. I was talking to a friend yesterday who's someone on his company listserv. Yesterday was Texas Independence Day, something that has been celebrated in Texas since their independence. So somebody sent out some completely normal message like lift a Lone Star beer today, which I love. Lift a Lone Star beer today and toast to Texas independence. And he was put down by one of his colleagues because they had bought into the entire idea that Texas Independence Day is a racist holiday because it'd be better if it was Mexico. I think the Mexicans dying to get there would disagree. And that this is not something that can be celebrated and it was part of a Confederate conspiracy to slavery because they can't understand anything with any happiness in their heart. If you invited this person to have a beer and a burger in your backyard, they would be sad about it. And you'd be sad if they came. And no, they were in a Texas office where this happened, obviously. It's not like we celebrated Texas Independence Day growing up in New England. And no one said anything. I think a couple people may have come out and said, you're right, this is good. Thank you for teaching us. You think they thought that? They were rolling their eyes, but they were also afraid. I mean, literally senior executives in this company could have said, that's bullshit. Mm-hmm. You sound like an awful, joyless person, and you should go out and educate yourself on all the interesting and wonderful things that Texas has done. Or maybe I'll do it for you if you'd like to have a Lone Star. Probably not in my backyard because then I can't get rid of you. But no one said that because they're afraid, and you'll lose your job. If I get canceled, I guess I could try to figure something else out. I've got some rooms to sell. I could at least go behind the scenes and peddle myself as a PR person or something.
Dude, you've been canceled already.
Right? I think I said tranny on a podcast once. But there's so many other people, if they get canceled, if you're on a brewery and you speak out, like some of our friends in California, and they destroy your business, you're bankrupt. It's over. You have to start all over again. And what if you're 55 or 60? That's pretty hard to do. If you've worked for 20 years to become a partner at this firm and you're 6 years from retirement and your option is to kneel and to say Texas is a shameful white supremacist experiment, or to lose everything, you're just going to kneel and suck it up and go home and tell your wife, I'm worried about my country. Now, if you see your colleagues being taken down, there's so much force and there's so much viciousness in these little Eichmanns, these little cultural revolution police that we've deputized all over the country, and people are afraid. The only hope that I have for this kind of a corporate environment, this environment of fear where people aren't able to really speak out, even on like their personal Facebook pages, is something that Bill Barr did before he left Department of Justice, and I haven't seen it recently, but it might have been, to say that teaching people that it's bad to be white creates a hostile work environment. Now, there's a novel idea. Now, if you get the corporate lawyers involved with this, and you get civil rights lawyers involved with this, the executives who are moving around out of fear right now and just going around to these horrible little children that they've employed, they will, please excuse the clock in the background, they will retreat as quickly as possible. And now I'll let you mute my mic. I forgot to mute the clock.
Chris is very proud of his grandfather clock, but it does present problems when podcasting at times. But no, it's an interesting thing. I mean, Bain Capital just today, for instance, tweeted out something about Women's History Month, but with women spelled with the X, as they're trying to do with so many words right now. And to the extent that we're sort of talking about how this affects people outside of, pop culture or the corridors of power, it's so interesting to think about why Bain Capital would ever think that it should refer not to Women's History Month with that E, but with the X. And it's because, as Chris mentioned, yes, the HR department, the boards of directors, these are all run by the same sorts of people in coastal enclaves who think the same sorts of things. And it was really interesting because Chris said earlier on this podcast that we don't all share values. We don't all share the same legends and myths and basic set of principles anymore. And that's true. Or spellings. But what's so interesting about that is that for the most part, we do. It's just the elites who want us. It's the elites who are backing the Equality Act, the 360 plus companies that the Human Rights Campaign has listed worth more than $6 trillion in annual revenue, employing 13 million Americans. It's those companies, or 13 million people in general, it's those companies and the people who run them, not their employees, that want that legislation. It's the Bain employees that want to change the word women and the definition of what it means to be a woman. It's not the people all over the country. And so I think that's what's so upsetting about this is the divisiveness is coming from the elites who are gradually shifting the norms and creating more and more people who believe what they believe because they are intimidating them into it and they're cowing them into it. And nobody wants to be called a bigot. So it's much easier to acquiesce in some of these small battles. And before you know it, if you're reading Dr. Seuss at a school library to your child, that might create and it might spark a local uproar that affects your husband's livelihood or affects your family's reputation in really negative ways.
You got to wonder what horrible, wretched, lonely child runs Bain's social media account. We're talking about the Mitt Romney company, right?
We are indeed.
This is not exactly Bank of America. I mean, or even like McKinsey. Like Bain's kind of got a conservative reputation, and to see them doing that, well, that's aren't you guys supposed to be evil? Like, come on, just embrace the evil. I guess they are actually embracing the evil with their misspelling of women. What a funny thing to do. But yeah, that's a place where we are, and the only thing that's going to make companies like that pull back from that, because I guarantee you, the 55 and 65-year-old partners at Bain don't believe that, and I have no idea what that is. Aren't on Twitter. No. These guys, that's an international company too. These guys would probably, if someone saw that, were like, yeah. And, I have friends and family at a lot of these major companies, and their inboxes are filled. Their work emails are filled every day with all these messages about how horrible the United States is and how we need to be better. I won't name companies to get anyone in trouble, but at least on this podcast, maybe in my pieces. But these are companies that often benefit from slave labor. I'm not saying Bain Capital, others that benefit from Chinese slave labor that work with truly, truly, truly evil regimes. But they do send out those emails. They make sure to let everyone know that they're virtuous. I think the Federalists should probably make some signs that say "This house reads Dr. Seuss" on some yard signs for our readers. Because I would put that out front. I live in Washington D.C. I'm kind of enemy territory, but I would be happy to put that out there. Even I guess I'll have to read some Dr. Seuss to myself, but it'll be fun.
See, this is
my cat like a weirdo.
Oh yeah, he's cute though.
Give him a hat.
You should live stream you reading Dr. Seuss to your cat in a homemade hat. Actually, that would be disturbing. I don't want to watch that.
I told you I need a wife. That's how nature says do not touch.
Yeah,
live streaming reading books to your cat.
Well, pretty soon you can marry your cat. I'm sure that's coming right down the road.
I'm sure it is, but no.
But this kind of gets to the last point that I think we should touch on a little bit, which is what is the breaking point, right? So is it possible that because Dr. Seuss is such a common, beloved touchstone, is it possible that because the left has attacked so many things, like Gina Carano is a really great example from The Mandalorian, super popular show, not a far right person at all.
He's like what the left has been clamoring for decades, a strong, tough woman who's an archetypal hero and doesn't need saving.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so this is what I was going to say is it possible, is the silver lining here that the left is pushing so far, so fast that there will be a turning point back towards, like, the momentum will swing away from the craziness? Is it possible that this is all self-defeating on their part, that they're defeating their own ends by pushing too far and too fast? I mean, of course, it's self-defeating on the level that they've actually broadened the definitions of racism and bigotry and white supremacy to the point where they're cheapened, and people are hesitant to apply those labels even when they're justified now.
And then we've also restricted them. For example, gangs of black kids beating the hell out of Asians. That's not racist, according to NBC.
Which is self-defeating by it defeats their own mission of defeating racism, which is a mission we should all share. But I want to ask if you think that it's possible the silver lining is that they're pushing too far, too fast, and that will cause a breaking point that'll swing the momentum away from the insanity.
In some ways, I don't think this is the final axe that's coming down. And it looks like some of our readers are interested in getting, some of our listeners are interested in getting these yard signs. So we better get Ben on that. I don't think it's the final swing of the axe. I think that there will be pushback. But the thing is that there needs to be concerted pushback. It needs to be broader and louder, and it needs to rumble and build and continue going. We need to actually launch campaigns so for our ability to read these books to our children and grandchildren. Because otherwise it'll be forgotten. And the left is very good at this. They'll build campaigns. I mean, Tucker Carlson last night in his show was playing a 4-year ago clip, to your earlier point, about a woman saying we need to cancel Dr. Seuss. Mm-hmm. And he just laughed because it was so insane. And now it's happening. I mean, the day before Dr. Seuss's birthday, when we celebrate National Reading, the Washington Post, I think it was, I'm not sure, and other newspapers I know were running fact checks saying, no, Dr. Seuss is not canceled, you stupid right-wingers. That was just in a library in Virginia, you idiots. Well, guess what? He actually just got canceled by cowardly corporations. That's only job in this world is to make it so that his legacy is preserved. The bad news is I think that, there will be pushback to this, like the literal redefinition of men and women that's being pushed by Pelosi and a lot of her allies in the national level and then the local level.
And it's hurting women, is physically hurting women, is hurting their access to scholarships, is hurting their bodies. The real harm is coming. It's happening right now. The consequences are real.
And there'll be pushback to that. But will the left eventually destroy this country? Probably. Yeah. It's going to be a really, 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 really hard uphill fight for us to regain it, and very difficult considering how little unity we have. I wish I had a more popular message or a better message, but I do kind of want, I guess, maybe end on a more joyful message, which is that, they can make it very difficult for guys like me to buy these books, but they can't make it difficult for you people who have them, like friends of mine who I talked to who are reading some of these banned books to their children last night. before they went to bed. They can't take those away. They can't take away the memories that we all have of childhood. They can't take away the joys that we can have secretly in our hearts and that we can share. They can't take away the fact that every morning or every Christmas time you can teach your family and repeat the traditions, read poems, read old books just the night before Christmas, read the Bible, pray together. They can try, but the more they persecute that, the more they expose themselves, the closer we get to, the closer you get to God, the more you're persecuted for believing in and loving children and taking care of the little ones and Christianity and the things that made this country great. We win in the end, but boy, I think some of the things in this temporal earth are in trouble.
Yeah, no, I agree. And what makes me really sad is that the reason this campaign, this pressure campaign, this intimidation campaign is successful is because this country has spilled so much blood fighting the scourge of racism and fighting the scourge of bigotry. So many blood, sweat, and tears have gone into the progress that this country has made, which is beyond basically any other country in human history in terms of freedom and equality. And it wasn't easy. And because bigotry is now so rightfully stigmatized in this country, people are being intimidated into allowing it to take root in a very different form. And that's what's most upsetting to me, I guess, when I think about this. I know Chris wanted to end on a happy note, but I just don't think that's possible on this topic.
There certainly aren't 300,000 dead woke college students lying in southern soils because they gave their lives to defeat slavery. There were 300,000 men who lived in the 1860s who gave their lives, children and brothers and sons and fathers. You're right, they should be remembered. And the men who gave their lives in the Pacific and the men who gave their lives in Normandy and across Germany and France should be remembered. And Dr. Seuss works to bring happiness to the children, and when they came back, their children, and those people who came back and were able to raise families, and even those who lost their parents, they were able to have Dr. Seuss. He was writing in the 30s, writing in the 40s, writing in the 50s. And even if they cancel him now, I guarantee you someday my children will be read those canceled books one way or another.
Well, you've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at the Federalist. He's Chris Bedford, senior editor at the Federalist. You can read his article on the cancellation of Dr. Seuss up on thefederalist.com. We will be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.